Hello from the Mars Desert Research Station in Utah. I'm Elizabeth Howell. I'm a freelance journalist working for Space.com, and I'm joined here today with Paula Kroc, who is the commander of Crew 133 at MDRS. And we are happy to answer some of the questions that you guys have been sending along. So the first one here is from Sabrina Surovic asking, will there be any research done into food growing, recycling, hydroponic systems, filtration, or water extraction systems?
Well, Sabrina, that's a good question. And yes, MDRS has been doing that kind of research since it was started over 10 years ago. The filtration and water extraction systems they've stopped doing a few years ago, but food growing and hydroponics they still do. In fact, we're sitting in the green hab right now, which is the greenhouse that's attached to the hab itself. And this is where they do the food growing experiments and the hydroponic experiments.
Sabrina also asks, while we're here, do you offset communication transmissions to make up for the lag time in communicating with Earth?
Yeah, another really good question. They used to do that here at MDRS, but it ended up being quite stressful for the crew to add such a time difference to the communications. Every night for 2 hours we have what's called Capcoms, where we communicate with mission support and pass back and forth any questions that we have and pass them our reports for the day so that they know the status of the hab. And it's difficult to try to do that kind of communication with such a time lag. It really stretches out the day too much.
Susan Griffin asks, what plants are you studying?
I had to talk to Gordon, our green hab engineer, about this because I wasn't quite sure myself, but he said that right now they're installing a new hydroponic system, and yesterday he and
Elizabeth Howell, that's
yes,
me.
yes. Elizabeth planted some seeds that are going to be the inaugural plants into the hydro system. And what were they? They were peppers and lettuce, right?
Yeah, basically peppers and lettuce. They're little tiny little things, so it was kind of a challenge to get them into the grooves of the soil that we had.
And the previous crew planted some herbs and some what I call psychological value plants, so flowers that they brought, and some cactus, which we have next to us, might be out of the screen. And then there was a local plant that they found growing outside that they brought in that's a little bit of an experiment.
And then Susan also asks, do we have a plan for terraforming in order for any colonization effort in the future? And if so, what have we determined to be viable given any soil composition evaluations?
I think I'll answer the second question first. It's been determined that Martian soil is viable for growing plants as long as we bring along some minerals like nitrogen for the soil. The first question is a little more difficult to answer. Terraforming is controversial, first of all, because there might be life there that we could be destroying by terraforming. And also it's a long-term kind of prospect. It would be hundreds of years before any sort of terraforming would be in place enough for us to be able to live there. And it might not actually work to begin with because Mars might not be able to hold an atmosphere well enough for us to be able to survive on the surface.
Tom Sagola asks, how do you simulate and deal with the extreme isolation a mission to Mars would entail?
Tom, isolation. Okay, well, first of all, we don't have any TV, radio, or cell phones here, so it's quite different from living out in the real world. We also have fairly limited internet. Part of that is self-imposed, and part of that is just it's a limited resource we have. So for 2 weeks, it's not too much of a stretch to go. It's not that much different than, say, vacationing somewhere a little bit exotic. So I don't think it's all that horrible to deal with, at least so far.
No, I don't feel very isolated so far, and the thing is we do have internet access, which means that we do still get messages from people and we can still communicate. It's just that we don't do phone, because then it's not an accurate simulation of talking between Earth and Mars. There's that 20-minute time lag on average. So that's really the thing that we're trying to deal with there.
But I do want to point out that the Mars Society is doing a 1-year-long study in the Arctic that will be quite an extreme isolation experiment.
And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with that particular one. And Benji Jimenez, sorry if I'm not saying that right, or Jimenez, what is the biggest mental obstacle to get over while on your mission? And is there any fear of not fulfilling it?
Yeah, I took a poll with the crew here because I wasn't quite sure how to answer this question. It's a good question. I think there could be a lot of good answers to this. And I think that the crew thought that the best answer for this would be keeping busy so that you don't miss out, or that you don't miss your family and friends back home. If you keep busy, keep working, you don't you get distracted from not being able to, say goodnight to your husband or your children, and the 2 weeks can maybe get by before you really realize how far away you are and how isolated you are.
Hunter is asking, why Utah? Why not at a higher altitude so it becomes even more realistic?
Well, if you've seen the pictures from our mission, if you look outside here, it looks very much like Mars. That's part of the reason that this location was chosen. It's also very remote so that we don't have cars and trucks going by or people walking through. It's isolated, it's dry, and it's geologically, there are some similarities to Mars, so it makes a pretty decent location for research.
And Craig asks, Martian dust is going to be a huge problem for any mechanics or spacesuits on Mars. Is this being simulated in any way?
Well, actually, we don't have to simulate that because the Utah desert provides plenty of dust for us to deal with on our own. And can we go back to Hunter's question about the altitude?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So we are at a bit of an altitude here, but to be realistic to Mars atmosphere, we would have to be at about 30 kilometers, which isn't really very realistic for a station on Earth. So yeah, it's not going to happen really. And I think we can do a lot with simulation.
It's okay.
Stumbling a bit here. I think simulation. We can do a lot of study in simulation that's worthwhile, without the risk of being in a place that would be at 1% of the Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah, we're doing the best that we can.
It saves us a lot of money and a lot of risk by doing a simulation, rather than being in a 1% atmosphere.
Exactly. And Arcasius asks, on a similar question, do you simulate the difference in gravity?
Yeah, unfortunately, that would be very difficult to do from a cost and technology point of view. So there's really no feasible way to do it. We can consider that when we're doing our research and try to take it into account, but there's really nothing more we can do.
Alexander Yosifov asks, will there ever be a mock Mars mission for volunteers?
Well, we're all volunteers here, so yes, that's definitely going to happen. Both MDRS and the Flashline Mars that the Mars Society do is all run by volunteers, and even the mission support. Most of the mission support is run by volunteers, so you could be crew members or you can be mission support as volunteers.
Taruli Rocco asks, I've heard that the real intent is for people to go to Mars as a one-way trip. How realistic is this assumption, and what kind of physiological or physical problems do you see from such a commitment?
Well, from what I understand, the Mars One plan is for a one-way trip, but I don't know that I've heard of many other plans to do a one-way trip that way. The Mars Society plan is not necessarily a one-way trip. That's meant to be a settlement that could be two-way, depending on the situation. In terms of how realistic, well, historically humans have been in this situation before where to colonize, for example, the New World, it was essentially a one-way trip. There wasn't really any feasible, technically yes, you could come back, but many, many people came here with the expectation that it was going to be a one-way trip.
Brian Fawcett asks, how long until we send someone to stay in space, do you think, and which planet will be first?
Yes, this is another question I polled the group with, and it seemed to divide along optimists and pessimists, and I'm an optimist, so there was some controversy there. What was it?
Well, there seemed to be some debate about what location and how long it would take,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So back to Mars One, which isn't us, but Mars One, according to the website, says that they're going to have people on Mars in 2025. I think, even as an optimist, I think that's optimistic. So I don't know. Somewhere between 2025 and I think our pessimist said 100 years. So maybe somewhere in that range. Challenges are, it's technologically still pretty difficult. There are some physiological issues we're uncertain how to solve. Certainly the technology of extracting resources on Mars, for example, we have. It's just a matter of getting all that equipment there and getting all the spare parts there that we would need, and getting all that equipment there and set up and working such that we can reliably send humans there and expect them to be able to survive. That's kind of the challenge. And I think it was pretty much a crew consensus that it's going to take a concerted international effort and a lot of money to do it.
And our final question is from Cindy Ramos, who asks, how's the medical aspect covered in the 2-week interval? And she was talking about things such as headaches, flu, toothaches.
Well, just like a NASA mission, we have a flight surgeon who handles any sort of medical issues that we have. Flight surgeon is someone who's not staying here with us, but who we're in constant contact with if we have any sort of medical issues. And in addition to that, we have a genuine medical doctor in our crew, so we can handle any sort of real medical issues with a real doctor, which is fortunate. What else did I miss?
It's really a boon having Nathieu there because he's a trained medical doctor. He works in France. He's actually worked with the European Space Agency, and he has a lot of space medicine experience, so that makes him ideal for this mission.
Right, yeah, it's quite a comfort.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much for your time, Paula. We appreciate it. And you can follow the mission on space.com and also on my Twitter feed, which is Howellspace, HOWELLSPACE. And we'll be sticking around here until about January 19th, and we're looking forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, thanks for your questions.